Thanks everybody for joining this evening and for your introductions. It's great to meet all of you. So I'm trying to find that piece of paper, as the spotlight, the alumni spotlight mentions, or maybe doesn't mention, yeah, I graduated from Fordham in 1995, so a little bit of a long time ago. I graduated with an American Studies major, so not exactly a major that you wanted if you're entering the job market necessarily. At the time, I thought I was going to go to law school, so American Studies made a lot of sense until I was about 2 weeks away from going to law school and decided that I wasn't quite sure I actually wanted to be a lawyer, which is a problem if you're going to law school. So I had done some internships when I was at Fordham. I worked for WFUV. So Jonah, I was the play-by-play voice for our football and basketball teams. The football team, unfortunately, was not quite as good as it was when you were there. We only won 4 games in the 4 years that I was on campus. So it was a tough job, but it was a tough job making those games sound halfway interesting, but it was a great time, had a lot of fun, and thought that maybe I might go into sports broadcasting. So that was one option. So at law school, sports broadcasting, worked raising money, helping to raise money from alumni when I was at Fordham. That was my work study job. So I think now it's called Ramline, I think is the name of it, but at the time it was called Phonathon. So I had met a few people who worked in the alumni relations and development office, basically the part of the university that helps to fund the endowment, raise money from alumni for different types of scholarships and other types of programs, and got offered a job to work for Fordham. So did that for 4 years and went and got my MBA at night. I had taken a microeconomics course my senior year and loved it. It was a little too late to major in economics at that point in my senior year. So I did recall that, or did think that if I wasn't going to go to law school, then an MBA might be a nice thing to have. Now for me, the MBA was important because I had a liberal arts background and needed to kind of rebrand myself back into the job market. And about halfway through, maybe 2/3 of the way through the MBA program, I got a job working for a boutique investment bank. So boutique investment banks are basically small banks, maybe 100 to 200 employees, maybe a couple $100 million were in assets. And it was, the MBA program was great, but the working for the investment bank, it was called Commonwealth at the time. That was like business boot camp for me. That's where I really learned about how the financial markets work. I really learned about what it was like, what it took to be a real finance professional. Stayed there for about 2 or 3 years and wasn't really sure. I never really had designs on being an investment banker per se. The work was intense, it was fulfilling, but I wasn't quite sure that it really offered the work-life balance that I think I wanted to have as I got older. So a friend of mine from Fordham, who was on the baseball team when we were there, was working at Moody's. And I knew a little bit about Moody's obviously through a business school and just kind of generally knowing that they were a credit rating agency. I didn't quite know what he was doing there, but he offered to have me come in, talk to a few people, and 18 years later, I'm still there. He left about maybe 5 or 6 years after that, but I've had, I kind of got lucky. I kind of lucked into my career, but it's been, I'd like to think as I look back that I had a design on where I was going and what I was doing. And I did always think strategically about what move I made, what it would mean for the next moves that I would want to make. Like leaving Fordham in terms of the job I had at Fordham, I loved that job. I loved working for Fordham. I was very passionate about the school, still am, obviously. And it was hard to leave that job. I was pretty comfortable. I enjoyed it. It was great. But I knew to get to where I really wanted to go, I had to leave. And so between the MBA program, working at the investment bank, that led to my career at Moody's. And in terms of Moody's Corporation, I'm sure a number of you are probably familiar again with the work that we do as a credit rating agency. There was a little piece of Moody's that essentially was taking all the information, all the data and the research that the rating analysts produce during the credit process. And we were basically repackaging it, putting it on our website and selling it to both buy side and sell side participants within the financial markets. And it became an extremely profitable business and high growth business for us. And when I first started there back in late 2002, we had just cleared $100 million in revenue for the year. And now we're at, I think, 2.6 or $2.7 billion in revenue for just the part of the company that I'm describing, which eventually became what we now call Moody's Analytics. So if you're familiar with Bloomberg, if you're familiar with S&P market, there's some other financial data providers. We kind of play in that space. We also compete head on with IBM, Oracle, SAP, some other large software providers as well. And again, I knew nothing about the financial technology space or financial information space until I actually started working in it for a company that was growing tremendously. And about eight or 9 years ago, took a job within sales management. I had always been in sales since I joined Moody's. And I always say Father McShane was the dean of Fordham College when I was graduating, and he handed me my diploma on graduation day. And if my future self came back and told me back in May of 1995 that I'd have a long career in sales, I'd probably be pretty disappointed. I'd probably wonder, oh my God, like what happened to my life, my career? Like I thought I was gonna be a lawyer or a sports broadcaster. I had all these other grand visions, but I didn't really know enough especially about business to business sales to know that it could be a very fulfilling and quite honestly, at times a very lucrative career as well. So I like what I do a lot, and I've had tremendous experiences all around the world working with all kinds of customers that we have with large investment banks, small banks, large asset managers, large insurance companies, small companies. It's been very fulfilling. So I tell you that story because none of you are, I wouldn't characterize you as unemployed. I think that's probably the wrong characterization. I was unemployed, but I was working at Chili's as a waiter, at Chili's restaurant as a waiter. That was actually my first job probably out of Fordham before I started at Fordham later on in 1995. But I tell that story because your career may take a couple of twists and turns, and that's okay. It's okay to take some time to figure things out. Like not everybody knows exactly what they're going to dive into as soon as they get out of college. Some people do, and that's great. Some people do and end up switching careers maybe a few years after. And most of my friends who majored in accounting were accountants for maybe 2 or 3 years, and now none of them are accountants. So it's okay to try, to take some time and be patient and try to find the right opportunities for you. And then your career will go off in a lot of different directions. So it's an exciting time. I know it's extremely difficult, obviously, with the pandemic. But in some ways, there's some positives to it in terms of being able to get people's time. Like this, for example, for me, it would have been very hard for me to do if I was still traveling all over the world, meeting with customers and driving my kids to soccer practice in my spare time when I could get there and getting on and off the LIRR. But I'm much more available now. And I think that's true of a lot of professionals now than we ever used to be. So I'll stop there. I've probably said more than I probably should, Lindsay. So sorry about that, but we can move on from there.
No, this is a great introduction. Thank you, Michael. Now, on the topic of, a lot of transitions during COVID, can you share how COVID has impacted your area and what trends you see developing over the next few years, if you can envision it that way?
Yeah, sure. It's so we're a company of, I don't know, maybe 5,000 people globally, and like most major Fortune 500 companies and most major institutions like Fordham and other colleges and universities, we went completely virtual on or around March 12th, which was a scary proposition for those of us in management because we weren't quite sure how that was going to work. I remember being in St. Louis was my last business trip the week before, and it kind of felt like it might be a little while before we get back on an airplane. So the one thing that's changed dramatically, and most of it is because of what we're on right now on Zoom, right? We used to, at the drop of a hat, we'd go and see customers, right? You need to go to London, you fly to London. You need to go to Chicago, San Francisco, LA, Sao Paulo, wherever it is, you go. Again, I know in the travel industry, it's been extremely painful, and my heart breaks when I think about all the pilots and flight attendants and people who work at the airport who I used to kind of get to know because I was there so often. I don't think that's coming back for a while. Certainly not in the next 12 to 18 months, probably longer than that. And so the ability to leverage technology to get in front of customers, to get in front of potential employers or hiring managers is accelerated dramatically. And I think that's probably going to be here to stay. I don't, travel and entertainment budgets are pretty big budgets, right? And so is commercial real estate, right? That's a big line item on a company's balance sheet. If you could cut some of that out, some of that's going to be pure profit. So I think a lot of companies are going to take advantage of the fact that we went virtual, completely virtual for months and months and months. And things are kind of okay. Is it the way we want it to be going forward? Not necessarily. I think we're all going to try to find some balance. But there are going to be pandemics always throughout the course of human history have always brought about changes and acceleration in trends that were kind of already there. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. So it'll open up some new opportunities, as it always does, and some challenges too.
Mm-hmm. And now I know you had mentioned that you enjoyed the traveling, and of course, that's on pause for now. But what do you like most about your job, and what is the challenge in this role?
So I never thought, the word sales always kind of scared me when I was growing up, even though I was kind of doing it. And I didn't even realize, like, being a waiter, you're in sales, especially if you're a waiter for a Chili's or an Olive Garden or something like that. You are there to sell desserts and appetizers and alcohol. They literally teach you how to do that, right? So you get a higher bill and a bigger tip, right? But I never thought about it as sales. I think as I've come to understand, I kind of understood this early on in my career. Sales is problem solving. A lot of jobs are problem solving. Investment banking is problem solving, and investment banking is sales. You have to be able to sell yourself, your firm, your ideas, internally and externally to customers. Sales and trading, obviously, if you're on a sales and trading desk at a major bank, that's sales. So I love the problem solving. Almost every day there's new problems to solve, and usually with our customers, I've grown. I've got the experience now, and to back me up, but I've grown more comfortable with. Okay, we have a potential solution. Sometimes it's not always obvious what the problem is that the customer has. Other times it is, but we're trying to see if we could help, and maybe we can, and maybe we can't. Hopefully, more times than not, we can. If not, then maybe we need to go back and readjust what we're doing and what we're trying to provide solutions for. But I like the problem solving aspect of it. I like the fact, especially in a job like sales or any customer facing job that you could have, you're dealing with different types of people, right? It's a very externally facing type of job where you're dealing with different personalities, different people living in different geographies around the country, around the world, and people of different generations, and it's interesting. It's never really boring. Every year I kind of, like, this time of year, I'm always like, oh my God, how are we going to do this again next year? And every year there's something changes and shifts, whether it's the markets or the pandemics, unfortunately, or things that we may be doing differently as a company, and that keeps it really exciting. And every day is a brand new day. So it's not without its challenges. It's not all rosy, of course. Everything is with challenges, but if you learn to try to overcome them as a team, we have a very team-based selling culture and very team-based culture, very collaborative culture as a company. And I'd say that's probably the third thing that I enjoy, is that we don't go it alone, where everyone's there to try to steer the ship in the same direction. And that's a lot of fun too.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Michael. Now, I know you had mentioned, speaking with Father McShane, and if you could go back and look at yourself, as you reflect back to when you graduated from Fordham, similar to the students in the Q&A today, what advice would you have liked to have heard when you were starting out?
So probably, at that time in my life, and I think everyone here on the call probably has a little bit of this, right? Is it's okay. You don't just graduate, right, and you got it all figured out. It doesn't work. You kind of feel like you've. I'll say two things. Number one is you need to take the time, and hopefully you've had probably more time than you wanted to with the pandemic and everything over the last 6 months or so. to reflect back on just a tremendous accomplishment. I mean, graduating from college, especially graduating from a university like Fordham, highly competitive, is a tremendous accomplishment. And you should always make sure you take the time to kind of just sit back and reflect on that before you move forward on something, just so that you're mentally ready to go for the next challenge, right? That's something that, to me, I remember the first few days I was back home in Connecticut after I graduated, and you're kind of like lost a little bit. I felt like I was in this twilight zone and lost between different worlds. And then I grew accustomed to it a little bit, and really started my job search in earnest, and was thinking, had the law school thing going on, and was trying to just really figure out what I wanted to do. But I'd say the second thing is, other than reflecting on the tremendous accomplishment you just had, you're going on another journey, right? And there's going to be many chapters in that book. This is one of them. And, the next job you find may be the next one that you may be there for 10, 20, 30 years, maybe. Or you may be there for a year or two and say, no, I need to shift gears again. So I'd say, don't panic. Just, be very strategic in your thoughts process in terms of what you're looking to do and how this step gets you to the next step, or maybe the next step after that. Because there could be a journey ahead of you, especially when you're going into a field like finance, which evolves quite dramatically, more so than a lot of other fields.
Now, to build on that, how would you recommend utilizing Fordham University to get the most out of your career?
Well, I think you're doing, one of the best things you could do now, right? Obviously, working with Lindsay and her colleagues and reaching out. You're in a great spot where if you reach out to alumni, if you figure it out for yourself, okay, these are the types of companies I'm interested in, and or the fields that I'm interested in. I imagine there are assets that you could use, or resources that you could use at Fordham, people that you could talk to, right, to help make introductions for you to those people who you want to talk to, right? So otherwise known as networking, which that was another word that I was never really comfortable with. It just sounds kind of clinical to me. Like networking is, I don't know, we're networking right now, right? But to put it, you don't want to put, I don't really like to put that type of title on it, even though that's what it is, right? But networking, when I look back at my career, networking, the two of my three best jobs I ever had were through networking. The one job that I liked but didn't love was not. And that's too bad, because if I knew more about the company, maybe I wouldn't have gone there. But even though it did help me get to where I eventually got to, but networking, staying in touch with people, and having if you just come and talk to an alumnus and you don't really have much, thought process into what you want to talk about or where you want to go, that's not that great. But if you have a very definitive list of questions, or where you're trying to go to, and how that person may be able to help, more times than not, people are going to want to help you.
Great, thank you. And now let's say one of our students, or many of our students here are fortunate to network with alumni and
Mhm.
get an offer. In your opinion, what are the top 3 skills needed in an entry level job in this industry?
It's a very good question. I'll talk about some of the things that I know I look for. I mean, at this age, right, or at this part of your career, no one's looking for you to have written, a Pulitzer Prize winning novel, or, really done some things that are just going to, no one thinks that you've created a new way to design exchange traded funds or something like that, right? So what we're looking for, though, is somebody who is, it's very easy to say, somebody who's going to be present, someone who works hard, someone who listens well. I mean, that's listening. It's fascinating to me how I get on interviews with people, and they feel like they need to do 80% of the talking, when they actually don't. You want to have much more of a balance with there. But I'd say being authentic in terms of what that job experience will give you is important too. Really understanding what the job is, how you could help the company, how the company will help you achieve your goals as well. Having kind of that well thought out is important, because it shows respect, and it shows real interest and real authenticity to the employer.
Mhm.
And then the last thing I'll talk about, which I think is it's really big in this environment, and it's always been big for those of us who have been hiring managers, I think, for quite some time, is what we call emotional intelligence, right? And that's really empathy by another name, right? Being able to read people, being able to kind of put yourself in that person's shoes and understand what their challenges are, what they're trying to accomplish, how they get rewarded. Again, that shows that you're listening. It shows that you're authentic, and it shows you could bring all that together, especially if you're in a client-facing position. To not the worst salespeople, and even in on Wall Street, and I've had the good fortune of working with everybody from Goldman Sachs all the way down to a hedge fund that was literally operating on some out of a guy's living room. Um, the the ability to empathize with people, the ability to have emotional intelligence is huge. And the people I've seen do that really well are usually pretty successful. And the people that can't, who want to listen to themselves talk and really just want to run straight over the client and what they're trying to accomplish, are usually people who don't do very well. Usually that catches up to them. So I think those are some of the traits that at this point, and we hire a lot of people out of college for either entry level type sales roles or entry level type marketing types of roles, and those are the traits that we look for, because those we're looking for people who are coachable. Right? I'll say that I'll end there. Right? If you're coachable and we could help train you and guide you in your career, then we could hopefully set you up for some tremendous success.
Great, thank you. Now,
And
if you,
I'll just end on one thing. Sorry, I just had one.
yeah, please go ahead.
I had somebody approach me. This is an internal candidate for a sales position. It's more of a senior level sales position, and they are highly qualified for the job from a technical standpoint. But the things I was talking about in terms of listening skills, emotional IQ, empathy, humility being another one probably I'll throw in there too, coachability. This person, unfortunately, there are a lot of red flags, and I didn't hire him because I can't. Yes, I know they could probably do the job and probably do it pretty well from a technical perspective, but those other, you could say they're soft skills. I'd say that's fine to call them that, although I think that's probably selling those skills pretty short. But yeah, it was a no-go for those reasons. So, thanks, Lindsay.
Of course, I absolutely agree to that point. I know at Fordham, if some students were fortunate in their undergraduate, in some of those electives, there's available courses on emotional intelligence, and I highly recommend to all the students today, building on Michael's point. If you don't know too much about emotional intelligence, and as he mentioned, those soft skills, look into it, read up on it, because they are skills that you will find highly important in your career success and working with your colleagues and such. Now, Michael, if you could do things all over again, would you choose the same path for yourself? Oh, I think we may have lost Michael for a second. Just bear with me, everyone.
Yes, I would.
Thank you. All
Happens
right,
again.
so Michael,
Dial in.
no problem. Thank you. So if you could do things all over again, would you choose this same path for yourself? I know you had mentioned that on your career path here, you've had a few different industry shifts. What would you give your advice to yourself if you just graduated?
Well, that's a tough question. That's like it's a wonderful life type of question. If you could go back and do things differently, like the movie. It's easy for me to say now that I would not do anything differently because everything worked out in the end, and it did, which is great. But there was a lot of anxiety and nervous moments. I always felt I was a little behind a lot of my colleagues who had just seemed to have it all figured out, whether they were the accounting majors or they were working for family businesses that they were taking over, or working for a government agency like the FBI or the SEC or something like that, or in the financial markets and private equity or something to that on that end. I think I was probably a little too impatient right out of college. I mentioned sports broadcasting was my first true love. That's really what I wanted to do. I heavily financed my education at Fordham. So my student loans were calling later that year. And quite honestly, I didn't feel like I had the financial wherewithal to really kind of hang in there and do what I really wanted to do, to follow my passion, as you might say, right? My second, I had law school. I had the opportunity with Fordham. I had interned in DC at a lobbying firm, and they offered to set me up as an aide on Capitol Hill if I wanted to come down to DC. So I felt like I had really good options. That was a good one too, but I just felt like I needed to get a job and make money and start paying off my loans and start building my own life. And it worked out great, but I probably would have been a little more patient maybe and tried to make, at least try to give it a go in terms of what I was really interested in doing. And I didn't do that. And I do have a tinge of regret a little bit for that. But at the end of the day, the path was what it was. And I'm very lucky and fortunate that I ended up finding a career and a company that I've really enjoyed working for and growing within.
Awesome. Thank you. Now, building on that, what is something you feel like you've done right in your career that has helped you get to where you are? So I'm thinking, is it a gut feeling, and having that patience, like you mentioned, that you think the students here could benefit from?
Sure. I'd say a couple of things. I mentioned earlier the networking, even though I don't love that term. But when I was able to talk to people who worked for Fordham, and when I was able to talk to my friend who was working at Moody's, those worked out really, really well. And I loved both jobs in both companies or both institutions. I eventually did have patience in my career, and I knew, and I'll tell another story. So right before, this is probably the year, I guess it was 2002. Yeah, the summer of 2002. And I knew I was going to leave the investment bank. The NASDAQ had imploded. The markets were a mess, and the reverberations were still being felt by a lot of financial institutions at the time. And so I knew I was probably going to leave. This wasn't for me. I just didn't enjoy being in that environment anymore. I had a series of jobs that I looked at. I had a couple of really good offers, and one was from Moody's. And I just felt that Moody's, it felt like me. It was a very conservative company, very collaborative, well-respected name, great brand. I felt like I needed that branding on my resume as well. I wanted that. I got, right when I was just about to accept the offer, I got a call from the head of sales, advertising sales at Sports Illustrated, at the magazine, which is barely alive now, but at the time was still going pretty strong. And they wanted me to bring me in and make me an offer. And that, I'm a huge sports fan. I saw Scott's Heinrich Lundqvist, I think, behind him, and the Giants stuff. And those are two of my favorite teams that I'm very passionate about. So it was really hard for me to say no to Sports Illustrated. To sell advertising for SI, and those folks are traveling to every major sporting event there is around the world. It would have been fascinating. But I knew I didn't love where the industry was going. The internet was just really getting going at that time. You could kind of see where the magazine industry might not be so great to be in. And unfortunately I was right. Even though that wasn't a huge, risky prediction, but I eventually developed that patience and kind of just knowing myself. By then I knew I was, 6 or 7 years out of college. I kind of knew what the type of company was that would be right for me. So it took me some time to figure that out, but I'm glad that I eventually figured it out. So.
Thank you, Michael. Now, just to close out before we open for Q&A, what is one piece or multiple, whatever you feel you'd like to share, what is one piece of advice you would give to a recent graduate into this group today?
Let's see, I feel like I've given a few pieces of advice. I don't want to.
Yes.
But I would say just, be honest, be true to yourself. Make sure that, be authentic, make sure that you what you're looking to do. I heard, MBA program and the SIE, and just make sure the way the way you're spending your time and your resources now, just make sure it's truly what you really want. And if it is, great, keep going at it. If it's not, then it's okay to do some course. I've done 2 or 3 big course corrections in my career. I did a bunch of course corrections, even my first year out of college, out of Fordham. It's okay to do that. It doesn't have to be a straight line. Not everything's linear. Things could go in a little bit of a zigzag fashion, and that's okay. It's okay to try things now and not love them, and keep looking for the thing that you really enjoy. I'd say that, I mentioned the law school thing. I was 2 weeks away from going to law school, and I never forget this day. I literally woke up in a cold sweat thinking, oh my God, like it was a dose of reality. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you never want to be a lawyer. You can do it, and it's great. And it gives you, there was like a safety knowing that I was going to go to law school. Like I had it all figured out, but I didn't. I was kind of fooling myself. And that was a big course correction. And I'm glad I made that one, because I don't think I would have been happy in that field. So.
That's really helpful, Michael. And again, it ties back into the points that you made about patience, and just even being
Yeah,
patient with yourself. And, like you recommended to this group, take the time after graduation. It's only been a few months in the realm of your entire life. It's
yeah,
really not
yeah.
that long, and really being strategic about the approach. So all of this information has been extremely helpful. I've enjoyed listening to you. I'm sure that they are
Well, thanks, Lindsay.
much
Thanks.
appreciative. Of course, it's invaluable information that you're sharing, and through experience and your stories. So I am going to